This is the story of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the last king and queen of France whose rise and tragic fall shook an entire nation and changed world history forever. When Louis became king in 1774, he was only 19 years old, a young man burdened with the weight of a kingdom drowning in debts after years of war and reckless spending. While across the country, millions of ordinary people struggled just to afford a loaf of bread, the royal court at Versailles continued to live in unimaginable luxury. Golden halls glittered with chandeliers, nobles feasted at endless banquets, and Marie Antoinette became the dazzling star of this world. Adored for her beauty but despised for her extravagance, she wore silk gowns worth fortunes, diamonds that sparkled like fire, and built a private palace, where she played shepherdess, while real peasants starved in the streets. Rumors spread that when told the people had no bread, she laughed and said, "Let them eat cake." Whether true or not, the phrase sealed her reputation as heartless and disconnected. Resentment grew like fire beneath the surface. France was a nation divided between the glitter of Versailles and the hunger of the people. And as the years passed, that fire was preparing to explode into a revolution that, the year 1789, became the turning point that shattered the illusion of royal power. For generations, France had been ruled by absolute monarchy, but now the people were rising with anger that could no longer be silenced. The storm began when crowds gathered in Paris, and on July 14th, they marched toward the Bastille, an ancient fortress that stood as a symbol of tyranny and royal oppression. With muskets in hand and fury in their hearts, they stormed the gates. The Bastille fell, and the sound of its collapse echoed across Europe. It was not just a prison being destroyed. It was the crumbling of the old order. From the villages to the cities, the cry of liberty, equality, and fraternity spread like wildfire. Banners waved high, tricolor flags filled the streets, and the monarchy found itself surrounded by enemies not just outside but within. Louis XVI stood frozen, unsure whether to negotiate or crush the rebellion. His hesitation became deadly because every day of indecision gave the revolutionaries more strength. The people no longer feared the king. Instead, the king feared the people. As famine worsened and bread became scarce, riots erupted in marketplaces. Women carrying empty baskets marched for miles demanding food. And in October, thousands stormed the palace of Versailles itself, dragging the royal family from their golden prison into the heart of Paris. They were no longer untouchable rulers. They were now prisoners of their own people. By 1791, the revolution had already torn away the royal family's safety, yet Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette still believed they could somehow escape the tightening grip of the people. On a dark June night, the royal family disguised themselves. The king dressed as a servant. The queen veiled to hide her identity, and their children bundled in haste. They climbed into a carriage and began a desperate flight from Paris. Their plan was to reach the town of Varennes, where loyal forces waited to protect them. But fate was cruel. Along the way, their faces were recognized by ordinary citizens who had seen their portraits. Whispers spread quickly through the villages. "The king is fleeing, the queen is escaping," and the people blocked the road, dragging the royal carriage to a halt. It was a humiliation beyond imagination. The ruler of France captured by his own people in the middle of the night. The news spread like wildfire across the nation. The dream of monarchy was shattered. Now the king was no longer seen as a father of the nation, but as a traitor willing to abandon his own people in their darkest hour. The revolutionaries in Paris erupted with fury. Pamphlets accused him of treason. Crowds shouted for justice. And from that day, Louis XVI was no longer a king in the eyes of the people. He was a prisoner awaiting judgment. And Marie Antoinette's reputation plunged even lower. She was painted as the foreign enemy queen who had whispered poison into the king's ear, urging him to betray France. The royal escape had failed, and with it the last thread of trust between crown and nation was severed forever. By the summer of 1792, the revolution had entered a terrifying new stage. France was no longer just a nation in crisis. It was a nation at war with itself and with the world. Austria and Prussia threatened invasion if the king was harmed. But instead of saving Louis, this threat only made the people more furious. They believed he was conspiring with foreign powers, and that belief sealed his fate. On August 10th, thousands of revolutionaries stormed the Tuileries Palace, where the royal family lived under guard. The Swiss guards tried to defend the king, but they were massacred. The palace halls ran red with blood, and the terrified royal family was taken into custody. From that day, the monarchy was effectively dead. Louis was now a prisoner of the revolution, And the question was no longer if he would be judged, but when. In December, he was put on trial before the National Convention. Accused of betraying the French people, the courtroom was tense. Deputies shouted, papers were thrown, and the king sat silently knowing the verdict was already written. He argued that he had only tried to protect his nation, but no one believed him anymore. To the revolution, he was no longer Louis the King. He was Louis Capet, a citizen stripped of titles, guilty of treason against the Republic. The vote was cast and the decision was final. The former King of France was condemned to die by guillotine, an act that would shock every throne in Europe and prove that the age of absolute monarchy was over. On the cold morning of January 21st, 1793, the city of Paris awoke in silence heavy with expectation. Thousands of citizens filled the streets. Soldiers lined the roads, and drums beat steadily as the carriage carrying Louis XVI rolled through the crowd. The once mighty king now dressed in a simple white shirt. No crown, no throne, only the gaze of his people upon him. As he stepped down from the carriage, he looked calm but pale. Climbing the wooden scaffold where the guillotine towered high above the crowd, he tried to speak, raising his voice to proclaim his innocence and forgive those who condemned him. But the sound of drums drowned his words. The revolution wanted no speeches, only justice. The executioner tied him down, and the blade gleamed in the morning light. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop, and then with a single pull the blade fell, slicing through history itself. The head of Louis XVI was lifted for all to see, and a thunderous roar of approval erupted from the crowd. Hats were thrown into the air. People cheered. Some dipped their handkerchiefs in the king's blood as a macabre souvenir. With that single strike, more than 1,000 years of monarchy ended. The divine right of kings was no more. France had killed its ruler, and the world would never be the same again. On October 16, 1793, the once dazzling Queen of France, Marie Antoinette, faced her own final journey. She was no longer the radiant figure draped in silks and diamonds, but a pale and broken woman dressed in a plain white gown, her hair cut short as tradition demanded for those condemned to die. The carriage that carried her through the streets of Paris was open for all to see. Unlike the king, who had been escorted with silence and respect, she was met with jeers and insults. The crowd spat, cursed, and shouted, calling her the Austrian woman, the foreign enemy, the mother of corruption. Yet as she sat inside the cart, her face remained calm, her back straight, her pride unbroken. When she reached the scaffold, she climbed the wooden steps slowly, every eye fixed upon her. She accidentally stepped on the foot of the executioner, and in that moment spoke her last words. "I beg your pardon, sir. I did not do it on purpose." A final glimpse of her dignity. She was strapped beneath the blade, and the drums thundered again. The guillotine fell swiftly, her head lifted high before the roaring crowd. The cheers were louder than ever, for the people believed they had finally destroyed the symbol of tyranny. Yet in that moment, something darker was born. The revolution had not only killed a queen, it had killed the last trace of mercy. Marie Antoinette, once mocked as Madame Deficit, was gone, her blood soaked into the wood of the scaffold, and her story sealed forever as the most infamous queen in French history. The death of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette did not bring peace to France. Instead, it marked the beginning of an even darker chapter. Their execution sent shockwaves across Europe. Kings and queens everywhere trembled because the message was clear. If the people of France could rise and kill their monarchs, then no throne in the world was safe. The French Republic was born in blood. Liberty and equality were shouted in the streets. But suspicion and fear consumed the revolution, and soon the guillotine that had ended the lives of king and queen began to claim the lives of revolutionaries themselves. The reign of terror unfolded. Thousands were executed in the name of freedom, and Paris became a city of fear where the blade never rested. Yet through all this chaos, the image of the fallen monarchs remained. Louis remembered as a weak king crushed by indecision. Marie remembered as a queen who lived in luxury while her people starved. But with time, their story became more complicated. Some saw them as villains, others as tragic figures swept away by forces beyond their control. Their deaths symbolized the end of an age, the end of divine right, the end of kings and queens ruling unchecked. Their blood paved the path for modern democracy and for revolutions that would echo around the world, from Europe to America and beyond. The story of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette is not just the tale of two royals. It is a haunting reminder that when rulers forget their people, the people will rise, and when the voice of the people becomes thunder, even crowns will fall and even palaces of gold will turn to dust.